Hello again from Washington, D.C. I'm Star Parker here with Cure America. Wow, the violent protests are almost over. And now to the political debate. Indoctrination of our children and ripping off of taxpayers. Well, our nation did get a good cry together. I guess we needed a good cry. Well, actually, I think my neighborhood here in Washington, D.C. looks more like a temper tantrum tornado came through than just good community and grief. Look, we were all saddened by that video. Anyway, folks around the world came out and cried with us, even risking catching coronavirus. They needed to get a good cry too. We'd been all shut in for the last 2.5 months. And then, just as state governments here in America were saying it might be a little safe for us to slowly go outside and play, we were exposed to a video of a grown man having his life squeezed out of him by the knee of a police officer. It was not a movie for us to then say, oh, wow, now that was a good movie. No, it was real life in real time, a real murder, a real person. Then next, as the civil unrest and chaos that gripped the nation subsided, systematic racism was identified as the driving factor of why we witnessed such a brutal killing. Public voices and institutions stepped up to provide their opinions of what went wrong. Congressional leaders wearing African garb kneeled in the rotunda of our nation's capital before dropping a massive bill to address police brutality. And of course, an accompanying demand for more tax money to flow into the coffers of those that have institutionalized the perception of racism as a business that was founded after the Civil Rights Act was signed into law in the 60s. Bank of America pledged $1 billion to address racial and economic inequality. And I'm still counting the growing list of major corporations and organizations throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at Black elites and liberal institutions in an attempt just to make the noise go away. At least that's what I hope they're trying to do instead of they really bought this lie. One liberal governor is lining up the blacks in his state to give them free health care, free vaccine, free abortion. This on top, of course, of our current welfare programs of free food, free housing, free money, which at least was designed based on income, not ethnicity. This couldn't get any more embarrassing. This is humiliating. Gosh, I'm glad I don't live in Kentucky to have to get in that line. Kind of reminds me of buying a car for the rebel teenager that storms at his, her, their siblings. They bully his, her, their classmates, take drugs in his, her, their spare time. And then they cut themselves up when a parent tells them, no, you've got to behave. This is very serious, guys. Now they're showing us statistics. The statistics are also being rolled out, showing the glaring inequalities that persist between blacks and white Americans. And these statistics are moving and relevant. And I don't want to diminish their relevance because stats and data are an important part of the work we do here at Urban Cure. But we must distinguish between symptoms and causes. Statistics are symptoms. They measure and report results. They do not speak to causes. In my view, very few are being honest about the real problems and the cause of racial disparities in America. Here's what Dr. James Heckman, professor of economics at the University of Chicago and the winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2000, here's what he observed when he was asked in a recent interview about obstacles to income and social mobility in the country. This is really intriguing. He said the main barrier to developing effective policies for income and social mobility is fear of honest engagement in the changes in the American family and the consequences it has wrought. He said the family is the source of life and growth. Families build values. They encourage or discourage their children in school and out. A huge body of evidence shows the powerful role of families in shaping the lives of their children. End quote. What is being defined as systematic racism in America today is really a subset of a national problem of moral chaos. And this chaos has disproportionately impacted our weakest communities, our weakest people. These topics and more will be my discussion today on Cure America as we look once again at the burden of race and rage when we return. Black Lives Matter is a political movement, and it arose out of a real concern in the Black community. In fact, it's one of the reasons that Blacks vote Democrat. When you look at the polling data on safety and security issues, for white and Blacks, they're exactly the opposite. Whites trust their local and do not trust the feds. Blacks are exactly the opposite. They trust the feds and they do not trust the local. We have to ask yourself why. Well, history. These are different experiences. And one of the challenges that we've had as African Americans is that we have unionized police forces now. For 100 years, the country said don't unionize your public servants. They're public servants. But now they're not. They're unionized employees. So what happens when you put unionized employees, which the nature of unions is that the poor get the rookies and the rebels. And you put that up against broken family life, big guys with a whole lot of energy and no dad to channel it. This is an explosion, and this is what has happened in our society. You put these two together, it doesn't work very well. So there is a concern in Black communities when it comes to raising boys. The challenge is it's politicized. Anytime you don't address a problem, nature so abhors a vacuum, someone will fill it. And that's what's happened. So you now have this whole movement of Black Lives Matters that is out to destroy this country as a result of their philosophy. And you have a vacuum on the other side because we don't even talk about it. Welcome back. Oh my, I have a very, very unique program for you today here on Cure America. I'm Star Parker, and my exciting interview, someone I already know, but his work goes so far beyond what I know, which is my friendship with him and his wife, and they're just beautiful family. But I tell you, he wrote a stellar article this week speaking into the things that we're talking about here on Cure America with Star Parker. Part 2 of the burden of race and rage. My very special interview guest today is Ryan Bomberger. Hey. Ryan, thank you. I have to say a little bit about you because they need to know more than just you're my friend.
Okay, just make sure you blow it up.
You're happily married to your best friend, Bethany,
yes.
Who's the executive director of Radiance. But Ryan Bomberger is the chief creative officer and co-founder of the Radiance Foundation based near Washington, D.C. They're adoptive parents with 4 awesome kiddos. I think you wrote the word awesome before they had to homeschool them during COVID, even though they already homeschooled, but this was homeschooling on steroids, I understand. But Ryan also is an Emmy Award-winning creative professional, an international public speaker, and author of Not Equal, Civil Rights Gone Wrong. Welcome.
It's great to be here.
It's good for you to come. Thank you for doing it last minute, too.
Last minute.
Yeah.
Got to drive through Ghost Town, D.C.
I know.
Bizarre.
Well, you know what? That's why when the domestic terrorists came through and she gave them till 11 o'clock at night to do whatever it was they were supposed to do, we weren't even open. That's why a lot of us are very upset. We had not even moved into phase 1. So that's why it's a ghost town. It was a ghost town before they came through, and now it's a boarded uptown. But anyway, that is not what we're supposed to talk about. Oh, wait. Well, yes,
sort of, yes.
Yes, it is, because your article you published on blackcommunitynews.com today is so eye-opening to look into who we were dealing with on these streets and why we all locked ourselves in, and now the insurance companies told everybody board it up because we're not sure. We looked at their website, but you wrote an article, it's called 10 Top Reasons I Won't Support the Black Lives Matter movement. You went through them too. You said the premise is not true. There's no goal for forgiveness or reconciliation. It's all about Black power. They heavily promote homosexuality and transgenderism. They completely ignore fatherhood. They demand reparations. They want to abolish prisons and police forces. They are anti-capitalism. Colin Kaepernick supports them. Pro-abortion is proof that not all Black lives matter to them. I want you to go through them one by one, especially, we don't have a whole lot of time, but I'm thinking that if I be quiet, you will be able to explain. But you also have to tell us a little bit about your story. So let's get into both at the same time.
Okay.
Their premise is not true. You said that they use racism as a political weapon. Tell us what you know.
Well, the premise of the Black Lives Matter Foundation and the movement for Black Lives is that police brutality is epidemic Black lives. We are endangered. You know, there's this epidemic of the killing of Black lives by police, and the numbers don't bear that out at all. In fact, you look at the numbers for 2020, you're looking at 2 Native Americans have been killed by police. There have been 9 Asians, you don't ever hear about them. The 46 Hispanics have been killed, 76 Blacks have been killed, 149 white individuals have been killed, okay? Wow. So you don't ever hear about anyone except for those of our complexion who are harmed or killed. Yeah. And out of all those who were killed by police, 90% of them were armed with a deadly weapon. So this year so far, only 9 of the 76 Black individuals who were killed were actually unarmed. So the whole premise is untrue. And as we're seeing in Chicago, in the last 24 hours, 18 homicides, I am 11 times more likely to be killed by someone of my complexion than a white person. So this whole white supremacy premise isn't true. I'm not saying that white supremacy doesn't exist. I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist. But they're painting this picture of this victimhood and this violence, this epidemic of violence that is not happening.
Well, where I was really intrigued is when you said they're using it as a political weapon, because we know the politics of it, and you have been in the public sphere for a little bit of time now because of your pro-life positions and other places that you've seen the cultural war. But it must touch you personally as well. I mean, you're biracial. They want to have hearings on reparations, and I saw that was one of your places. What line would you even get in? Are you the one that will be
paying? And receiving. I guess it cancels itself out.
What's going on? I'd really also like point 2, no goal of forgiveness or reconciliation, because I've often said, you know, the issues of the past of America, that when after our rebirth, after the Civil War, we were born again, but then we had to go through the Civil Rights Movement. But it seems that was settled in the Civil Rights Act. So something else has happened to where we constantly have to talk about racism as if it is institutionalized, as if it is systematic, as they're saying. So tell us a little bit about number 2.
Well, as a Christian, for me, I have to have a biblical worldview on things. And so the Black Lives Matter movement, and they have their own manifesto. People can see it at m4bl.org.
And there's you mentioned it in your article. I went and I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But go ahead, there's no
mention of forgiveness. There's no mention of reconciliation. So this is what ends up happening. Just like 6 years ago when Ferguson happened, we repeat the same thing. So we get back to the exact same starting point. So there's no forgiveness, there's no reconciliation, there's no moving forward. And so as a Christian, I reject the worldview that, first of all, an entire people group can be blamed. Because that's basically, you know, Black Lives Matter movement is based on the critical race theory. There are 2 groups. You have the oppressed and the oppressors. And people of our complexion are always the oppressed. We're always the victims. And the oppressors are always white. And that's not helpful. You can't fight prejudice with more prejudice. You can't fight racism with more racism.
You know what intrigued me in doing a little bit more research after your column was that it is about ethnicity worldwide. They don't stop with just African Americans and the experiences here in this country. It is a them against us, and it seems like a war against the Western civilization. And why I would be concerned mostly about that premise is that this is where we get Christianity. So it seems like that ultimately they're against Christianity. But I want to talk about number 5. They completely ignore fatherhood.
Well, in order to promote homosexuality and transgenderism, they have to omit fathers. So they mention mothers, they mention villages, and they mention parents, but apparently fathers aren't part of the village. And we're seeing what's happening to the village. The village is in pain. And yet the reason for that, the largest contributing factor, is the absence of fathers. When fathers aren't in the home, you know, a child is 4 times more likely to grow up in poverty. When a father's not in the home, children are 2 times more likely to drop out of high school. Young girls are 2 times more likely to be obese. I mean, the list goes on and on of 7 times more likely to become pregnant. There are so many negative outcomes of the absence of a father, yet they don't mention fathers at all. And so as a father of 4, as someone who had a great role model for a father, children need a mother and a father. I understand there are circumstances where that doesn't happen. I know a lot of single moms do all they can to, I mean, your story obviously exemplifies that, but we can't ignore the reality that fathers are needed.
We gotta
Dads
have
matter.
That. You know what, I'm so glad that you're going to be able to stay with me because I've got to get out of here. When we come back after this moment, we are going to look at what's happening with the police. Up next, do American cities need police? I'm going to ask my panel of experts in one moment.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor of MyPillow. Thanks to your support, you've helped make MyPillow become one of the fastest growing companies in America. Over the last 12 years, you've helped MyPillow create thousands of jobs right here in the USA.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
That's why I invented MyPillow. My patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs and helps keep your neck supported and aligned. I'm interrupting this commercial right now to give you deep discounts, not just on my pillows, but also my mattress toppers, sheets, and so much more. For example, you can get body pillows regularly $89.99, only $29.99 with your promo code. With our 60-day money-back guarantee, you have nothing to lose. Sleep well, America!
For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit mypillow.com.
Hi, I'm Star Parker, and you're watching Cure America. I was thinking about my next panel and thinking then about my past. Some of you might not know that I used to live a life of despair and on welfare, and for a number of years, living that life that we saw last week, just going through wreaking havoc on different people's neighborhoods. And so I was thinking earlier about a neighborhood without police. Now, I didn't think much about the police at the time. I was conditioned not to like them. But, it's kind of like a doctor or lawyer. You don't like them until you need them. And so I'm just wondering if this is a good idea, what the progressives are pushing for now. No police. No police, no peace. I don't know. We're going to talk about it. Does America's cities need police? And so I want to ask my distinguished panel. I have a great panel with me again today. Dr. William Allen, who's with us as the Chief Operating Officer of the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. Thank you for being with us.
Good to be with you.
I have again Richard Manning, author, political consultant, and president of Americans for Limited Government. Thank you, Richard. I forgot to say author, co-author of Necessary Noise
right.
with me.
And with you.
So you're going to have to constantly plug it, okay? Next time I'll put it in my
I'll make
notes.
the necessary noise.
You'll make the noise. I bet you will, too. That's why you were my co-author, because you're Americans for Limited Government, my man. But I have to be good, because Mr. John Malcolm is with us, and we'd like for him to join us again in the future. And very distinguished Vice President of the Institute for Constitutional Government at the Heritage Foundation.
Great to be with you.
I'm so glad that you're here, because we want to hear from experts. I'm just extremely concerned. This narrative changed very rapidly. When we move out of COVID into just domestic terrorization of our whole communities all across the country, and now we're supposed to say, okay, next, what should we do? Let's confiscate a whole lot of tax money. Let's start spending it on things that really aren't the federal role. And now they're talking about police and some national registry. In fact, I'm not sure exactly what they do want, and that's why I'm so glad that you're here. What I do know is that Jason Riley, writer for the Wall Street Journal, pointed out that this is not exclusively about police behavior that we're dealing with, but criminal behavior. He said police department reforms might solve about 2% of Black deaths due to violence. Tell us, what's in this bill? What is it that they want in policing the country from our nation's capital?
Well, the House Democrats have introduced a bill, and it's 136 pages, and it's kind of a grab bag. It covers everything from a national ban on chokeholds, creating a new conspiracy to commit lynching federal crime. The last verified...
Wait.
No, literally. The last verified lynching in this country, by the way, was in 1981. And if anybody thinks that the perpetrators got away with it, they did not. The 4 people who committed that crime were all convicted, and the leader, all Ku Klux Klan members, the leader was executed, in fact. But nonetheless, lynching was, of course, a dramatic problem in our nation's history, and it has a great deal of symbolic value. There's a call to return to Obama-era pattern and practice investigations by the Civil Rights Division. And then there are calls for, things like greater transparency for police misconduct, greater money for training, including to learn de-escalation techniques. So it's kind of a grab bag, and I think some of the proposals, they might actually find common ground with some Republicans. And then, of course, there are the people out there calling to dismantle police departments and defund them. That those are not serious proposals and, in fact, quite dangerous ones.
Well, I bet they are quite dangerous, but the problem that I have with the progressives is they put an idea out there, and it seems like just a little bit of time, we get close to it. And I'm just concerned that we could go there. Just this whole idea of social workers. When I was on welfare, I had a social worker, and they're not going to police a community. I can tell you that. In fact, when I was, they were supposed to come to my house, make sure no man lived there. She called me and said she wanted to go to lunch with her girlfriend. So if anyone ever asked, just pretend like she came by. Richard, I'm just not sure that Congress has a role in policing our nation's police. What are you thinking about this?
Well, they don't, but I think we've got the fundamental thing they're trying to do by defunding police, by going down that pathway. They're creating zones right now. In fact, in Seattle, Capitol Hill is now an Antifa-governed zone. And, Antifa is now responsible for the Capitol Hill area, which is a very intense residential area. And so what they're doing is they're ceding the role of the state to Antifa or to a local gang or to whoever that happens to be. And so let's just it is exactly right. But let's just talk about what the ramifications are. If you eliminate police, you are creating anarchy. It's guaranteed. And when societies have anarchy, they demand a strong man. They demand a dictator to fix it. That's how we got Mussolini in Italy. Was the system broke down, there were no laws, and Mussolini came and said, "I'll fix it," and they turned over their country to a fascist. That's how that occurs. It's a historical pattern that's irrefutable, and that's what they're pushing for, is a complete dismantling of our society. And defund police is a step in that direction because it creates anarchy.
Wow, and it's interesting that you would use Mussolini as an example. I was once in Italy, and one of the older gentlemen I met actually showed me the card that he was still carrying. He was really old, and he still had the card, and he's like shaking to show me what they had him sign just so he could work after they had killed his friends. Dr. Allen, what say you about some of this that we're seeing, and this insistence? They're using race to promote an agenda that we've seen in the past in other countries, and it didn't fare well.
We've seen it before. We've seen it not just in other countries, but we've seen it even here. There's a phenomenon that's developing, namely, take something putatively beneficent, benign, but a silly idea. Generalize it in such a way that nobody sees the silliness. That's really what's going on.
Okay.
Defund the police, that's the same thing as the argument that Jason Riley was talking about. The police are everywhere engaged in an epidemic of oppressive behavior and conduct. How many of us have relatives who are police? Most of us do, usually.
Right.
So what is at war is our common sense appreciation of how we live with a rhetorical presentation of our life. The rhetorical presentation of our life is meant precisely to drive the kind of wedge that Richard is describing. So it's not a serious proposition, except insofar as it's meant seriously to destroy the society.
Right.
I'd like
what it could do. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to just try to put this in perspective. So, I want to make clear up front that I think that George Floyd was murdered, and that the charges against Officer Chauvin are the right thing to do. But every year, there are roughly 375 million police-civilian encounters every year. So last year, the Washington Post said that there were 1,003 civilians who were killed by police officers. The vast majority of those were in self-defense. There were 14 unarmed black men who were killed by police officers out of 375 million. And that's 14 too many, I understand that. But we do not have an epidemic of racist police officers. In fact, major metropolitan areas now across the country, the chiefs of police are African Americans. There's a higher percentage of African Americans now serving as police officers than there are African Americans as a percentage of our population in this country. So are there bad cops? Yes. Are there racist cops? Undoubtedly. There are bad people and racists in all walks of society, fortunately, I believe, in diminishing numbers. But unfortunately, when something like this happens, it's just like ripping a scab off a wound and rubbing salt into it. Are there some reforms that might make sense? Yes, but we need to keep all of this in perspective.
This is an illustration of what I'm talking about. We slide into the discussion of the phenomenon of racial difference, assuming the premises of the rhetorical argument, which is false to begin with. The more we slide into that discussion, we're actually strengthening that argument that seeks to destroy us. So that I don't go that route because it's false to begin with.
Well, it's interesting because I've been arguing as well that what we saw in the video were individuals. This is ethnicity was brought into it. And I think that it caught most Americans off guard to see murder in live time in front of them on their TV after we've been sitting in the house watching TV for like 2.5 months. But you're absolutely right. I don't want to buy into this idea of systemic racism. It's just not true. Now, the left institutionalized the perception of racism by insisting that every time we look at any situation, race matters. But Richard, I want you to say something about this because I think that you represent a people group, or you're part of a people group that pushed Donald Trump into the White House and knew that America had problems, and by golly, we need somebody in there that's going to look at those problems and try to fix them. How did we get from him saying this is a country of law to where now they're kneeling in the rotunda and demanding that we have discussions about reparations and police brutality? Well,
it's actually pretty simple. One side wants to have racial division because they believe that creates political opportunity. It's no secret, and you talked about the House bill. The House bill also gives millions of dollars, the NAACP, to La Raza, and to the ACLU.
Oh, come on.
Okay, so
it's not enough that these all these other folks are giving away money.
As part of that, it's using the nation's treasure and saying you're a racist if you don't agree with doing these things. So they're attempting to play on a people's natural, white people in particular's natural inclination not to be called a racist. It's a terrible thing, and so in order to prove you're not, you now have to say Black Lives Matter. To prove you're not, you now have to pass this bill and give lots of money to groups that are antithetical to American interests.
Or lose your job.
I
saw where someone, he retired from his own company because he was backed in a corner that you're supposed to buy into Black Lives Matter. We're painting on the street. Has anyone thought about looking at what their website says?
The answer to your question is, we have the single best equalizer was destroyed during the COVID shutdown that the left largely pushed. And it was and that equalizer is people having a job, people having opportunity, people being able to not be dependent upon the government because they didn't need the social safety net, which turns into a hammock or a stranglehold.
Oh, Dr. Allen's here and you now.
So
no, you're absolutely right, because this is true. Black Americans, all Americans were working, and this is a threat to the established progressive unit here in Washington, D.C. and their agenda. And all of a sudden, we're down to where the businesses that were almost open are still shut down. Tell us about the answer. What is it that we're going to do in policy? Are we to Americans to fight this new proposition? I already heard that the Senate might actually think about some of these ideas because they bought the premise that this is systematic.
They've bought it, and it's being purchased on both sides of the aisle in some respect. I've been developing a theory. We all know what the IQ is, the IQ test. I'm developing an MQ test, the morality quotient. And I'm discovering that we've just about approached zero as a culture.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
And our complete deficiency of moral judgment is what is being exploited in this moment. So that even the people of good intentions, people of conservative instincts, still must bow before the shrine of racial differentiation before they can open their mouths. that tells us we're in deep trouble.
Well, it does, and I think we're going to talk later on, and you'll be staying with us on another panel that we look at that community response and culture and society. But back to nationally.
Can I say one thing on
please.
systemic racism? What systemic racism says is everybody who is other is racist. Okay, anybody who's white is racist. That's what systemic racism means. Right. And we've built systems that are naturally racist.
Right.
What
but
that
only
means,
the other, because it's only about that Western. But everybody else of color.
But I want to remind people: if everybody's racist, then no one's racist, because you aren't able to single somebody out who is actually someone who means harm to somebody because of the color of their skin. Right. Because everybody is tarred with the same brush. Wow. As a result, what they are effectively doing is they are devaluing the individual act of racism by saying everybody is racist. Hence, individual acts are certainly excusable.
Well, and that's the problem. Individualism's getting lost in all of this. I want to thank my panel, and I want to thank you, and we will be right back.
Hello, I'm Franklin Graham. Right now, we're in Alaska unloading a hospital for COVID-19. But right now, our country is in trouble, and people are scared, people are afraid, and we see the violence and the injustices that are taking place. Only God can change this. This is a problem of the human heart, and we have sinned against God, and as a nation, we've turned our back on God. And I want you to know that God loves you, He cares for you, and He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, from heaven to this earth to take our sins. And if we'll confess them and repent, turn from them, and believe on His Son, Jesus Christ, God will forgive us and He'll heal our hearts. If you've never invited Christ into your heart, pray this prayer with me right now. Just say, God, I'm a sinner. I'm sorry, forgive me. I believe Jesus Christ is your Son. I want to trust Him as my Savior. I want to follow Him as Lord from this day forward forever. Amen. Call that number right now that's on the screen. We've got someone who will pray with you, talk with you, encourage you. God bless.
Boy, that was an exciting time. I mean, from IQ to MQ, this is going to be interesting. Star Parker here to Cure America, and I'm glad that you want to cure America too. I still have on the panel Dr. William Allen, who has his M2 theory, and I do want to hear more about that because the questions on the table are moral as well as political when we review this burden of race and rage. I have again my special guest and co-author Richard. Hey Manny, he's the president of Americans for Limited Government, which is one of the things that endeared me to him and always will, because we have the same passion for the Lord, we have the same passion for our culture and for our country. And then Ryan Bomberger, thank you. Emmy award-winning creative professional, chief creative officer and co-founder of the Radiance Foundation, which he runs with his best friend and wife and of their 4 children as well. The Radiance Foundation, she's the executive director there. So thanks guys. Dr. Allen, I need to start with you because you in the last segment brought up that this is moral. And I want to ask you, based on some of the things that we are hearing, and the data is showing us mountains of stats, data, reports, broken marriage equals broken communities, and yet there's this insistence that we're a village, that we should not think about the moral angles, that we should only think about the racism, only think about the systematic racism, only think about ethnicity. But I want to ask you, do boys and girls need married parents?
Boys and girls need parents. They need firm, stable homes. They need faith. They need God. They need all of those things that make human beings better human beings. But to make the transition from that into the argument that those who don't have them are lost, that is where we make the mistake.
Okay.
They are not lost any more than the unbeliever is lost to Christ if the invitation is extended. I'm conducting, very briefly I will say this, an experiment on social media at the moment, Facebook and elsewhere, to ask people to respond to a current video that has been sweeping the country, a video about separating black kids and other kids from white kids in a race for a $100 bill.
My, was that just offensive?
Well, this test is to say to people, tell me what's wrong with it. And I will tell you No one yet has been able to do so. And I'm talking about good people, not the bad people.
Well, let me explain to those that aren't familiar because they haven't seen this video. It's a teacher, I guess it's of goodwill. Now, everybody has their little black stuff that they're doing to show how compassionate they are and how grief-stricken because of the death of Mr. Floyd. And so they line up a mixture of ethnicities in the youth, and then they ask the kids. I mean, you have black and white kids in there. Okay, how many of you had two parents? Step 2 steps forward.
Right.
So more whites than blacks did. How many had this? How many had that? And all of the things that they asked about were just materialism, except the parent part. And it ended up where only blacks were left in the back of the line. I was embarrassed for them. And he's trying to make this point that when you see your white kids, you should feel guilty. This is what white privilege looks like. You're mad. What do you think, Ryan?
Maybe you can solve my question in my test.
No, I don't know. I can't solve the human mind, which it really makes no sense. That's a horrible thing. That's an example of using prejudice to somehow fight prejudice.
And he probably didn't even know he was doing it, which is to your point. It
is exactly my point, and I think it's worse than prejudice. I think this was a criminal act, if without intent, at least by negligence, equally violent with the act of the murder of George Floyd.
Let me hear.
And I will explain all that one day.
One day. What were you thinking about?
Well, this is the whole problem with what it does is it constantly puts people into groups simply by the hue of their skin. I mean, I don't call for a colorblind society. I love all of our colors, but God created our color to celebrate, not to separate ourselves by it.
Yes.
But that kind of exercise, what it constantly does is it drills into the mind of young children that they are simply different because of the color of their skin.
Yes.
I mean, it's not any kind of scientific study to do an exercise like that.
Well,
I think it's.
We know that the data, if you are at risk and you're in some of our zip codes, we know that this is disproportionately hitting African Americans and it's broken the family. The welfare policies in this country over the last 50 years broke the family.
Right.
I told you earlier, I was on welfare. The rules were don't work, don't save, don't get married. So of course it collapsed. Of course then you have these social pathologies. But to your point, Richard, I'm concerned that not only is this humiliating and embarrassing to the African American, but to the white kids. I'm now hearing these instructors think that now we have to talk to the youth at 4 and 5 years old to tell them how to make sure they get over their racism. And the first place they do it is by identifying that they're racist. I'm like, they're 4 years old. A 4-year-old's gonna start walking up to me and asking me about my color? There's something going on here that we probably should stop.
My favorite video, one of them, on YouTube, is it's a little 4 and 4-year-old boys, and they want to get the same haircut so the teacher won't be able to tell them apart.
Oh.
And one is black and one is white. Okay, because they don't see color.
Right.
Okay,
I know kids.
And so I mean, think about that. So they want to take those kids and say, "Oh, he's other."
Right.
They want to separate those kids.
They end up shaving the head.
That's correct.
If they shave the head,
it was the cuteness factor that sold
it. It really is still an innocence.
The point is very simple. We create constructs,
Right.
and constructs that differentiate rather than things that bring us together. Right. And in terms of your example, I saw it one time. I didn't notice that they asked, "Did you go to church when you were a kid? Did you read the Bible when you were a kid?" Put them 10 steps ahead because they have been at least trained in a moral position. And in being trained in a moral position with absolute truth, that is a tremendous advantage in the world.
Had they asked that, the black kids probably would have been in the front.
Exactly right.
Look at all the data. It shows that blacks overwhelmingly go to church in the country.
But the reality is, remember, they ran the race based on the separation.
I know.
If they had only reversed the experiment, and yet you'd have had all those disadvantages, but people had run a fair race.
Right.
The lesson would have been obvious.
Right.
And the rest of this stuff could be forgotten.
Right. Well, it's like a book that someone wrote. I think her name was Carol Allen, and she was ending preferences, because when you think about what's happened in our society, we have been taught and conditioned to look at race first, to look at these preferences, but it's escalated to where now it's about privilege.
Yes.
As if you could select your parents. Ryan, is there going to be anything that we can do? Culture and society is being turned upside down. What are you thinking that we can do to reverse it? Your creative energy, you've got a great website, and you do a whole lot of activism and backtivism.
Yes.
But what should folks be thinking about?
Well, I actually like the advice from an agnostic individual, Morgan Freeman, the actor, who says, you want to stop racism, stop talking about race. We are so fixated with race. I mean, we went from codified segregation, where the physical segregation, to what's been discussed here, psychological segregation.
Yes.
And that's being promoted. We have to stop identifying everything by color and assuming. I can't look at you and pretend that I know anything about your background, pretend I know anything about your moral convictions or your actions. But yet that's what children is being drilled into their minds, that you know somebody simply by the hue of their skin. So we have to stop being fixated.
We have to stop. In fact, we need to stop them now.
Yes.
Because if you entrench this in the next generation, we will end up to where we are totally segregated and total enemies of each other. Are there any ideas, Richard? How do we stop it? You got ideas too, Dr.
No. Turn to Richard.
Well, I'm going to talk to
back.
Richard and then I'll come back, because I want to know, what do you think that we can do? We've got to stop them from focusing on ethnicity and race. I don't want people just to see me come out and think that they know everything about me because I'm black.
Approximately 24 of the 50 states have Republicans as governors and state legislatures that are Republican. Okay? What they ought to do is they ought to take control of their education systems. They ought to take control of their education systems now. We've been lied to. The educators always say, "Oh, you need to stay out of it. Politics can't be in academia." That's a lie. When the politicians stay out of academia, the academics then are controlling the messaging. If we want to defend our culture, take back the schools. And in those states where you have monolithic control by the Republicans, South Dakota, places like that, there's no excuse for allowing this systemic racism to be taught when it is a lie that is a dagger to the heart of our society.
Well, we need to be pushing, because even the former president of the United States, George Bush, got into this and saying, oh my goodness, he's the one that coined the soft bigotry of low expectation, and now what is he doing?
He's into it. He's bought it.
He's bought it. He might have always believed it, but I think the education point is a good one, because the Espinosa decision at the Supreme Court will come out in this month. Actually, Espinosa, Montana had a voucher. It was a scholarship program, and Miss Espinosa won, and she has 2 children, and she won the scholarship program, and so she took the scholarship to a Christian school, and they sued her. The lawsuit ensued. They took it back. She won 1 round. She lost a round, and now it's up to the court. And they heard it. I listened to the hearings, and it might come our way to where we can get rid of all the Blaine amendments in the country that have made it unconstitutional for money to follow children to schools parents want. So, Richard, we might get what you're saying. We might get an opportunity. I don't know if you could depend on the Republicans to do it. What do you think, Dr. Allen?
No, I didn't say you could depend on it. I said what they ought to do.
Right.
Okay.
Two different things.
Even though my expertise is politics, my answer to this question is slightly different. I was on an interview on the public square just a little while ago, and I was asked this question about whether we can somehow penetrate our separate stories. And my answer was, that's exactly the problem. They have imprisoned us in separate stories. But we can only have separate stories if we have not, in fact, accepted Christ. Because everyone who's accepted Christ has one narrative, one story.
That is true.
Amen.
That's true. We have been born again. It does concern me that what Ryan brought up, that when you separate us into these little islands and you think that you know everything about someone based on that, if that view is already skewed. I mean, look at who controls the entertainment and culture through about the black community. This is this is not going to work out really well for those for the 4 out of 5 who do not live in poverty, for the 39% of African Americans that live in suburbs. This is to me, they're going to increase police pulling them over if we keep down this route.
Right, but we're all victims. I mean, simply by our pigmentation, we're all victims. And victimhood is powerful, it's potent. But I find it funny,
Some people even giving away free stuff. That governor up in
Kentucky, right?
Yes.
Line up.
But
all the blacks line up. We don't have any trains. Honest, we don't. Line up. We're going to give you free stuff.
It's crazy.
But abortion is one of those free things they're giving away.
Exactly.
You know all about that.
More black babies aborted than born alive. In New York City, for every 1,000 born alive, 1,033 are aborted. So all these people protesting systemic racism ignore it in the one industry where that actually kills for a living. But look at all the institutions that they're talking about are racist. Who runs them? Progressives. I mean, look at Hollywood, look at the news media, look at school. Who runs them all? So who's then to blame for these environments of all this oppression?
Right.
The left.
You know, in your column, when you mentioned about the Black Lives Matters, and if you haven't read Brian Bomberger, you should, because he wrote 10 reasons he's not joining that Black Lives Matters. And if you look into what they represent, you won't join them either. And then you need to have a talk with your child if you let them go out there and march in the domestic terrorist protests of the last couple of weeks. Because one of the things you mentioned in there is exactly to your point. These folks have an agenda. They actually want to destroy the country and the corporations that are behind this. Like one of your points was Colin Kaepernick, and you mentioned how his little Nike, they're not only made in China, but then there are no blacks on their board. It's like these hypocrites.
I mean, did he take a kneel in their boardroom? I mean, it's crazy. And he's silent about the tens of millions killed in the country that's making his shoes that give him this multi-million-dollar
And he's
contract.
silent that the textile industry in China has been cited by the Department of Labor as being a slave labor place.
Exactly.
So his
Wait,
shoes,
what happened?
the Department of Labor has said textiles coming out of China are produced predominantly by children and by slave labor. So Colin Kaepernick, with his millions of dollars he's getting from a shoe, that shoe is being made by somebody who's a slave or a child in slave labor. And that is the untold story of why Colin Kaepernick is a complete fraud.
Right.
Oh,
That's what a social justice warrior is. So.
Oh, wow. I don't even know where to go. Well, I know where we're going to go. We're going to do a wrap up a little bit, but then also I know where I'm going because I'm coming to you every single week. Cure America with me is every single week. And so I want to thank my panel for being with me. I think that we gave folks a whole lot to think about. When we come back, I'm going to just add, I have a pastor. I need a pastor, even though Dr. Allen is also a pastor, but I want a pastor of a congregation to ask him, can America be good without God? We have a problem. That MQ is real. And I just want to thank you. Especially you, Ryan. You're going to come back with us another time?
Anytime.
You got to. These two are always with us. I'll be right back.
Today, a student in public school will pray or lead a Bible study. Someone will share the gospel with a lost soul. Today, a pastor will preach boldly the truth of the Scriptures without fear of the IRS. The body of Christ will be the salt and light in a darkened world to engage responsible biblical citizens. Today, the life of an innocent child will be saved, and a mother will experience the joy of a newborn baby. A distraught woman will find hope and choose life rather than death. Today, there is a strong voice defending God's created natural order of marriage and family. There is a defender of freedom in the courtroom and in the halls of Congress and in legislative bodies across the land. Today, a young girl by the name of Justina Pelletier will eat dinner with her family and sleep in her own bed. Today, all of this is possible because of the ministry of Liberty Counsel. People from all over America will find help and hope because of Liberty Counsel. The adversity they face will be turned into victory, case by case, law by law, person by person. Liberty Counsel is advancing religious freedom, the sanctity of human life, and the family through litigation, education, and public policy. In the midst of adversity, there is opportunity to glorify God and to restore the culture. And that is the mission of Liberty Counsel, to restore the culture by advancing life, liberty, and family.
Wow, this has been an interesting discussion we've had here on Cure America with me, Star Parker. And we are continuing the discussion from last week, the burden of race and rage. And before I get to my wrap-up panel, though, that will be looking at where we go from here, I just wanted to share with you a couple of books because I mentioned the Ending Racial Preferences by Carol M. Allen. You might want to look at this, the Michigan story. So you can see, Google it to find out, go to your favorite book seller and get that one. But I also have Bethany's new book. I didn't even know she had it out. Bethany Bomberger has a new book, Pro-Life Kids. And the Pro-Life Kids, I'm going to read to my granddaughter for sure, because she's of age. My grandson will probably say, Grandmommy, I'm 14. Okay, fine, you're 14 now. That's okay, but you can still read about pro-life kids. It seems so very interesting. So I just wanted to share that with you. And don't look too closely at my fingernails, because yes, we're post-COVID. I haven't been able to get to a nail shop. Oh, but those terrorists, those domestic terrorists, they could come outside. I hope the nail shop opens soon too. Maybe I shouldn't be wearing a mask. Oh, wait, I'm not gonna say anything because I have a pastor with me. No, I'm not gonna be a rebel. I did the right thing the last couple of months. I stayed in. They said stay in. I did. Anyway, let's wrap up. We got to cure America. I tell you we do. So we got to look at what's next. What should we be thinking about? Where should we go from here? So Mr. Lonnie Poindexter, founder of the Lions Chaser Network, and he's the chief correspondent for cureamerica.news, and Pastor Nate Thomas, and I had pastor of with a blank, but I said, well, I have to get his bio, and then he finally gave it to me, and boy, is it impressive. I've known Pastor Nathaniel Thomas for quite some time, but he is also the pastor of Forestville New Redeemer Baptist Church, which I've actually spoken there and met his lovely family and all of his members. He's a member of CURE, Urban CURE. We have a clergy network, so he's a member there. He is also a licensed independent social worker, so I'm very happy to know that, because I need to know from you, can America be good without God? Where do we go from here? Thank you for coming, Pastor.
Yes.
But that's a real question. It's sad. The things we've just talked about, they're very sad. And I just don't know, what are you thinking about as a pastor? You're local. You're part of the Baptist apparatus here in D.C. area. They destroyed Washington, D.C.
First of all, I'd like to say, thank you for inviting me here today. That's a very serious question. Can you go without God? We're in a situation now where there are many that are dropping away from the faith. As I begin to look at a number of your famous gospel rock band groups, for an example, a guy by the name of Michael Gongor, he's one that has millions of viewers, and he's now had come out to say, I no longer believe in the stories and the literature of that which comes from the Bible. And then there's another young man by the name of Jonathan Steingard. And Jonathan Steingard has millions of followers. Going with a rock band, a Christian rock band by the name of Hawk Nelson. And here, this guy has now said, I cannot no longer believe in God. And here he's singing before thousands and millions of people.
Singing gospel?
Singing gospel. This is a gospel band. And he's saying, I no longer can believe in this God thing. And guess what? His background, he grew up as, he's a PK kid. He grew up in the church. And he said in one of his interviews that I was very reluctant coming out, sharing my heart as it relates to this. But then I found out that many others feel the same way as I do. But the point that I want to, and the point that I want to make here is that we as a church have a big job ahead of us, because we have many who are within our own ranks who are dropping out, and Satan is taking over.
But why? Lonnie, you grew up in a household that passed values. You talk often about your dad and transferring those values. Is this maybe where it got lost, because it's not just the church's role, but the family's role and the dad?
Yeah, I think in the community today, we have an issue with the loss of traditional patriarchy in the family, that you have many drifting away. But in the case of this particular gentleman, it sounds like he came from an environment where he was blessed with both parents there. So there, in fact, Pastor and I were talking about this prior to coming on. There's a real falling away with individuals who were heavily steeped in the faith. I mean, amongst the young lions of Christendom back in the day, if you think of Carlton Pearson and some of these other, and they've all drifted away. So it's almost scary, but we know that God does not need a huge army. He just needs an army that will stand.
And it's not new. I mean, when you think about the Lord himself, he chose, they kept coming and got bigger, bigger, and then the crowds, and then he finally started testing them. And at one point, I remember the one when he asked them to drink his blood and eat his flesh. And it's like they all ran away. And then he looked at his disciples and said, "You running away too?" And they were like, where would we go? You got it. You got it. The message of the gospel's real. I know that firsthand.
Yes.
So how do we get our church back? How do we get the space where we communicate the love of Christ to where people understand that God is not mad at them, that he's reconciling the world to himself and not counting their sin against them, so that they then will become good people? Because I don't know if America can be good if we don't have God-fearing people. Without God, can America be good? It's the Tocqueville question. He said America's great because it's good. When she stops being good, she'll stop being great.
Right.
Pastor, where do we go?
Well, here again, just like in Psalm 1, he says, only a fool says that there is no God. We have to come back to our first love. In God we trust. And we, however, we are living now in a time where God is being placed on the back burner based upon so many other dynamics that are influencing our children.
Well, yeah, but their parents can stop that influence. And you know what I'm really upset about as well is people that go to church every Sunday morning, then they go vote for Democrats who then don't believe in God. I mean, these people have been very clear that they're purging the Lord from all public square. We have bakers in court because they don't want to bake for homosexuals. We have, and it's not that they don't want to bake for homosexuals, they just don't want to make a wedding cake. We have, the culture war is real. But what you're pointing to for religious people, including, that you said, he had a dad because he was a preacher. That's what that PK means, preacher kid. I don't know, Lonnie. I just don't know if America, what I do know is that we saw the Congress bowing their knee while Nancy Pelosi is looking at her watch to push progressivism, which is anti-God. So I do know that. So what are we going to do to reverse the trends that we're seeing here in Washington, D.C., so that we can get at least an even playing field for the churches to compete?
We need the lion chasers to stand up. We need those uncommon men and women of God to stand up. We need the standard bearers. We need to see the examples. There's a boldness that comes from individuals that will take a stance. Like Pastor here took a stance in the pro-life community to stand up and say what's wrong about abortion clinics. I remember participating with him with a protest, him doing that same thing. I think it's contagious when we do that.
It is. And I think that that's why we're doing this. And I appreciate you. This time just went too fast on this particular panel because of some serious information. But that's why every week we will have a wrap-up clergy panel just to encourage you to keep standing if you are, and particularly in the internet. I mean, people that have their own space, God gave us an opportunity to witness, because now we can have friends and keep passing truth. It comes down to truth fundamentally. And so I'm going to thank you both for being here with me. We just run out of time too quickly. And so, Pastor, I'm glad that you brought it up, though. It starts with the church, doesn't it? It starts with us. We've got to get our culture under control. I'll be back with a few final thoughts.
If the act passes in its current form as H.R. 5, then every right that women have fought for will cease to exist. H.R. 5 is a human rights violation. Every person in this country will lose their right to single-sex sports, shelters, grants, and loans. The law will forbid ever distinguishing between women and men. Male rapists will go to women's prisons and will likely assault female inmates. Female survivors of rape will be unable to contest male presence in women's shelters. Men will dominate women's sports. Girls who would have taken first place will be denied scholastic opportunity. Women who use male pronouns to talk about men may be arrested, fined, and banned from social media platforms. Girls will stay home from school when they have their periods to avoid harassment by boys in mixed-sex toilets. Girls and women will no longer have a right to ask for female medical staff or intimate care providers. Everything I just listed is already happening. And it's only going to get worse if gender identity is recognized in federal law.
Why are conservatives standing with liberals to strip women of their rights? America's women deserve better.
Wow. You heard it. I heard it. And with all of the statistics being reported, here are some of the most glaring. A half a century ago, less than 10% of our babies were born to unwed mothers. Today, it's over 40%. A half a century ago, 75% of American adults were married. Today, it's less than 50%. Over 60 million abortions since Roe v. Wade became national law in 1973. You know, the First Amendment that guarantees religious freedom has been distorted to be interpreted that religion and faith must be purged from our public square. But as implied in our Declaration of Independence and the preamble of our Constitution, the law is rooted in truth and truth is rooted in God. We can pretend that it's not true, but it is. The war on religion in America has been successful. The result is the chaos we see today. And we saw chaos over the last few weeks. This has to stop. Because yes, Black Americans have suffered disproportionately from our nation's moral decline. You know, the Bible asks a question in Psalm 11 when the psalmist talked about this moment that we're in. He said, if the foundations are destroyed, what will the righteous do? You know, the psalmist was really intriguing because he talks often about this tension that we have in our society today. This tension between the right and the left, the worldviews that are clashing in a cultural war right now. That's why I'm doing Cure America with Star Parker. And I'm glad that you're here with me, Star Parker, because we've got to, if we're going to do something, we've got to do number one, we've got to have the courage to state the truth that the core problem in America today is moral. We also have to, number two, we have to state truth, that a country with no sense of ultimate truth is one where we will see collapse of family and law that protects private property. Exactly what we're seeing today. I mean, these folks wreaked havoc. They put a fire down on my apartment building and it's a building 100 people living there. Not even a care in the world to think about people were in that building, all in the name of rage because of race. Number three, what will the righteous do? Well, for those who care about the welfare of Black Americans, we must support public policy that will reverse the damage. The first thing we need to do is support public policy for parental choice in education. Money should follow children to schools the parents want, period. Number two, we need to promote policies that promote personal ownership, personal responsibility, personal retirement accounts to replace the payroll tax. You won't burn down Wall Street if you own Wall Street. Money should follow people to IRAs instead of the IRS when it comes to saving for Social Security. Number three, we should support policies of housing and healthcare that promote individual freedom and choice. And number four, especially in this moment that we are in right now, as the Congress thinks they got to come up with some more public policy to redistribute other people's wealth, what we need to do is leave ethnicity out of any and all future public policy and purge it from all existing laws. If these last 10 days of protest were about ending systematic racism, then our national next step should be to end every affirmative action program and every racial preference policy and program in the country. That's it. The answer is really quite simple. Freedom is connected to law. Law is connected to truth. And truth is connected to God. I'm Star Parker. I hope I'll see you again next week on Cure America with me.